Alright, this is a presentation to show how to set up a secure VNC tunnel, but it could be used to set up a secure tunnel to almost anything. The problem that I'm trying to get to is just the ability to give remote control assistance to an end user. In other words, I want to be able to interact remotely through keyboard, video, and mouse with their interactive session that they're currently using on their desktop. The end goal, of course, being to help the user. The problem is that some of the products that are out there, especially TeamViewer, which seems to be like the big number one that people recommend, but it's probably maybe more designed for like, what a big company might use for doing this. And maybe in certain circumstances, you don't want to pay for something like TeamViewer. And then you look at the other cheap solutions. If we try to, you're kind of concerned about lack of security, if it's maintained. Maybe it's just a little bit too much of a black box for you to actually trust it as some vehicle by which you can connect to remote desktop, the remote session, not a remote desktop, but something, where you're actually interacting with the live end user session. VNC, virtual network computing, sounds like the easy answer to all these questions up until a point, right? I mean, it's got good support. It works with that user's console session, so it does that aspect. But the connections are encrypted. They use a simple password off. Yeah, it's a little bit too much exposure, So if you're on a network running VNC and you got somebody in the middle just sniffing traffic, they're going to say, well, this is way too easy because, I can see everything that you're doing. So VNC alone is probably a really bad idea. Just like I wouldn't put RDP sessions just hanging out there on the network indiscriminately. But they're much more protected, trust me, than VNC is. I certainly wouldn't do VNC just sitting out there by default. So we want to try to secure this all. So what we want to do is encrypt the source to target, including that simple VNC password. We want something that's fairly easy to set up. I'm going to make the assumption that we can't see the target directly, which I think is a good practice. And especially if you're on the internet, especially if the thing that's on the internet, like again, you would never want to put someone's remote desktop on the internet. And so that should never, be the case. You can expose your services on the internet, just don't expose a person's Windows platform onto the internet. We are going to expose something on the internet here, though. What we're going to expose is something we call a jump host. So the source can see the jump host, and the jump host can see the target. That's the idea of a jump host. So while the source can't directly see the target, since the source can see the jump host and the jump host can see the target, you can build this encrypted bridge to our destination. And then we want to make sure our target's VNC port, in this case, firewall-wise, is only visible by the jump host. This is to protect the local LAN so that a person can have a VNC server running on their end user platform, and you can distribute that out however you do your normal Windows setups out to all the desktops. It'll be listening, but the only thing that's capable of actually seeing it is going to be the jump host box. And this may have other requirements with regards to how the end user is set up so that the jump host can actually see the target. And so it's encrypted and we're tunneling. So we're going to use SSH because it's just there and it's already set up and ready for us. The other thing about it is that we can put protections on SSH. So we can have fail to ban running on SSH so that if you were to expose your jump host, for example, to the internet, you could run it on a foreign port that's not port 22, which I highly recommend. That'll get rid of 99.999% of the attack surface. And then run fail to ban on top of that for anybody who does happen to find your port to protect your SSH from being abused. I would use keys instead of passwords. There's a whole lot of things that you can do to secure your SSH to where it's very resilient and virtually impenetrable, from the outside. And I recommend doing all those things. So keyed access, move your SSH port, and run fail to ban. You do those three things, and you're probably pretty good. So with that, I'm going to end this presentation and jump to my shell. And then I've written a program called VNC Tunnel that actually portrays, the concepts that we need. In order to set up one of these tunnels, the things I need to know are going to be what local port I want things to run on localhost. In other words, I'm going to connect VNC to a port on my own local box. And what's that port number going to be? And then I need to know the target port on the remote host that I'm going to, the target, which is normally 5900 by default for a VNC server. It's configurable, right? And then I need to specify the jump host information, the jump port, which would be the SSH port, which again, it defaults to 22 in this command, but you would want to set it to something in some high-numbered random port if you were to expose this on the internet, if you want to avoid all of those millions and millions of attacks that you'll get once you expose something just on port 22. So move it, get it off of port 22. And then, of course, the jump host. What is that host name that we're going to be reaching out to build our tunnel through that knows about us, so that we can, either, and usually it should be by key, by SSH key, it allows to establish a session. And then, of course, the username on that jump host. And then the target host name, which is that also corresponds to that target port. So the target port goes along with the target host name. That's the VNC, the guy that running VNC, the desktop that we're trying to get to. And just to show you what that kind of looks like, so let's say this is my setup. I want to SSH to a machine, or build a tunnel, I should say, to Windows 10 for VNC use. So I want a local port listening at 15900 that's going to connect to Windows 10 on 5900, and I'm going to do that via my jump host called jump.example.com in here, in this case. The -n just says this is not an interactive SSH session. The -f says you need to leave this running, and that's really, what you're going to do. You want this thing to execute. And so let's assume that I've done this command already to establish my tunnel to my host. Then I should be able to go and do my VNC connection locally and enter that oh so secure VNC password and actually connect to my remote desktop, inside of whatever network this resides in. This could be even at someone's, home, if you will. Usually, if it's someone at home, I'll just warn you, normally what you're going to have is these people are probably already establishing a VPN or something like that to your corporate network, so that you can refer to their host name by, their host by a host name. Otherwise, there's a lot more work to do, and it should, right, with regards to doing that that connectivity. So this is just a simple port forward through a jump host, not some kind of registration where the end user's host is registering themselves with a tunnel at your endpoint so that you can talk through to it. But that is another way that's beyond this particular discussion. So I hope you enjoyed this brief tour of setting up a typical SSH port forward tunnel for the sake of VNC access.